Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies, and this is Gilds from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Gilds. The word gild, or geld, from the Saxon gildan, to pay, originally meant a tax or tribute, and hence those fraternities which, in the earlier ages, contributed sums to a common stock were called gilds. Colwell, the Old English jurist, defines a guild to be a fraternity or commonalty of men gathered together into one combination, supporting their common charge by mutual contribution. Societies of this kind, but not under the same name, were known to the ancient Greeks and Romans, and their artificers and traders were formed into distinct companies which occupied peculiar streets named after them. According to Dr. Lujo Brentano, who published in 1870 an essay on the history and development of guilds, England is the birthplace of the medieval guilds, from whom he says that the modern Freemasons emerged. They existed, however, in every country of Europe, and we identify them in Compagnons de la Tour of France and the Bau Corporatione of Germany. The difference, however, was that while they were patronized by the municipal authorities in England, they were discouraged by both the church and state of the continent. The guilds in England were of three kinds: religious guilds, merchant guilds, and craft guilds, specimens of all of which still exist, although greatly modified in their laws and usages. The religious or ecclesiastical guilds are principally found in Roman Catholic countries, where, under the patronage of the church, they often accomplish much good by the direction of their benevolence to particular purposes. Merchant guilds are exemplified in the 12 great livery companies of London, and the modern trade unions are nothing else but craft guilds under another name. But the most interesting point in the history of the craft guilds is the fact that from them arose the brotherhoods of the Freemasons. Brentano gives the following almost exhaustive account of the organization and customs of the craft guilds. The craft guilds themselves first sprung up amongst the free craftsmen, when they were excluded from the fraternities which had taken the place of the family unions, and later among the bondmen, when they ceased to belong to the familia of their lord. Like those thrift guilds, the object of the early craft guilds was to create relations as if among brothers, and above all things to grant to their members that assistance which the member of a family might expect from that family. As men's wants had become different, this assistance no longer concerned the protection of life, limbs, and property, for this was provided for by the thrift guilds, now recognized as the legitimate authority. But the principal object of the craft guilds was to secure their members in the independent, unimpaired, and regular earning of their daily bread by means of their craft. This very soul of the craft guild was its meetings, which brought all the guild brothers together every week or quarter. These meetings were always held with certain ceremonies for the sake of greater solemnity, the box having several locks, like that of the trade unions, and containing the charters of the guild, the statutes, the money, and other valuable articles, was opened on such occasions, and all present had to uncover their heads. These meetings possessed all the rights which they themselves had not chosen to delegate. They elected the presidents, usually called aldermen, afterwards masters and wardens, and other officials except in those cases already mentioned, in which the master was appointed by the king, the bishop, or the authorities of the town. As a rule, the guilds were free to choose their masters, either from their own members or from men of higher rank, though they were sometimes limited in their choice to the former. The wardens summoned and presided at the meetings, with their consent enacted ordinances for the regulation of the trade, saw their ordinances properly executed, and watched over the maintenance of the customs of the craft. They had the right to examine all manufacturers and the right of search for all unlawful tools and products. They formed, with the assistance of a quorum of guild brothers, the highest authority in all the concerns of the guild. No guild member could be arraigned about trade matters before any other judge. We have still numerous documentary proofs of the severity and justice with which the wardens exercised their judicial duties. Whenever they held a court, it was under special forms and solemnities. Thus, for instance, in 1275, the chief warden of the Masons built in Strasbourg Cathedral held a court sitting under a canopy. Besides being brotherhoods for the care of the temporal welfare of their members, the craft guilds were, like the rest of the guilds, at the same time religious fraternities. In the account of the origin of the company of the grocers, it is mentioned that at the very first meeting they fixed a stipend for the priest, who had to conduct the religious services and pray for their dead. In this respect, the craft guilds of all countries are alike, and in reading their statutes, one might fancy sometimes that the old craftsmen cared only for the well-being of their souls. All had particular saints for patrons, after whom the society was frequently called, and, where it was possible, they chose one who had some relation to their trade. They founded masses, altars, and painted windows in cathedrals, and even at the present day, their coats of arms and their gifts range proudly by the side of those of kings and barons. Sometimes individual craft guilds appear to have stood in special relation to a particular church, by virtue of which they had to perform special services, and received in return a special share in all the prayers of the clergy of that church. In later times, the craft guilds frequently went in solemn procession in their churches. We find innumerable ordinances also as to the support of the sick and poor, and to afford a settled asylum for distress. The London companies early built dwellings near their halls. The chief care, however, of the guildmen was always directed to the welfare of the souls of the dead. Every year, a requiem was sung for all departed guild brothers, when they were all mentioned by name and on the death of any member. Special services were held for his soul, and distribution of alms was made to the poor, who, in return, had to offer up prayers for the dead, as is still the custom in Roman Catholic countries. In a history of the English guilds, edited by Coleman Smith from old documents in the Record Office at London, and published by the Early English Text Society, we find many facts conformatory of those given by Brentano as to the organization of these guilds. The testimony of these old records shows that a religious element pervaded the guilds and exercised a very powerful influence over them. Women were admitted to all of them, which Hubert thinks was borrowed from the ecclesiastical guilds of southern Europe, and the brethren and sisters were on terms of complete equality. There were fees on entrance, yearly and special payments, and fines for wax for lights to burn at the altar, or in funeral rites. The guilds had set days of meeting, known as morning speeches, or days of spekinga todidae, for common profit, and a grand festival on the patron saint's day, when the members assembled for worship, almsgiving, feasting, and for the nourishment of brotherly love. Mystery plays were often performed. They had a treasure chest, the opening of which was a sign that business had begun. While it remained open, all stood with uncovered heads, when cursing and swearing and all loose conduct were severely punished. The guild property consisted of land, cattle, money, etc. The expenditure was on the sick, poor, and aged, in making good losses by robbery, etc. Loans were advanced. Pilgrims assisted, and in one city, any good girl of the guild was to have a dowry on marriage, if her father could not provide it. Poor travelers were lodged and fed. Roads were kept in repair, and churches were sustained and beautified. They wore a particular costume, which was enforced by their statutes, whence came the liveries of the London companies of the present day and the clothing of the Freemasons. an investigation of the usages of the medieval guilds, and a comparison of their regulations with the old Masonic constitutions will furnish a fertile source of interest to the Masonic archaeologist and will throw much light on the early history of Freemasonry. See Gilds in the 11th edition of the Britannica Encyclopedia. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.